In this video, I'll take a look at my latest sort of impulse purchase, which is this new AV receiver. Currently, my AV receiver is an old Cambridge Audio Azur 540R, which is absolutely ancient. It must be at least 10 years old, and it doesn't support HDMI, so I can only use it really for the audio functionality, and then I have to have a separate HDMI matrix switch to switch the HDMI, which I can cope with, but it's started to develop other weird issues. The current one being that it forgets its settings every time you turn it on. I've taken it apart and there's no sort of battery that would suggest that that could be the problem. But yeah, it loses all its settings, so you have to then reconfigure it every time using the on-screen display, which is only output over composite video and feels like you're programming a 90s VCR. So it's been a good receiver, but it has to go. So today I went to Richer Sounds just to take a look at what receivers they had, and I was like, I'm not going to buy one, but I'll set myself a budget of £500 and see what they sell. So I accidentally bought one. It did come under budget. It was £499, so I did spend under budget technically, but here it is. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at what I've bought, take out the box, take a look around it, then I'll install it in the rack, get it all connected up, and we'll see how it works. Now, I'm not an audio expert, I'm not an AV guy, I'm much more on the computer side. However, it'll be interesting to see what it's like. I know enough to sort of get it going, so we'll see what it's like. So this will be sort of almost novice's first impressions of this thing. So the model I went for is the Denon AVR-X2400H. It has way more features than I actually need, but it ticks every box that I had in my requirements. So my requirements were that I wanted an Atmos receiver. Now I don't have Atmos speakers, I don't have any sort of Atmos setup. However, I may get that down the line, and it's something I've been looking into getting. So I wanted to have a receiver that supports it, so I don't have to replace it down the line. What I also wanted was it to have a front HDMI input. It seems like a minor thing, however I'm installing this in a rack where I can't easily get to the back of it. To get to the back of it involves moving the whole thing out, unscrewing the back of the cabinet. It's a complete nightmare. So having an easy to access HDMI port on the front for plugging devices in is actually quite important, and this has that. It also has two HDMI outputs, which is very handy because I have a TV and a separate projector. So being able to just connect them both in without having to have a separate splitter or switch is pretty handy. It supports loads of other features as well that I didn't actually really need. So it's got Spotify Connect, I think that is. It's got Bluetooth audio, which will actually be quite nice. It supports Denon's HEOS multi-room system. I've got no idea what that is. We might find out. And you know, the box is just peppered with literally a million different logos of various things it supports. So it probably has way more than I need, but it'll do me for a while. So now let's take a look inside and see what we get. Unfortunately, I missed cutting it open because I forgot to hit record. I am an idiot. However, I've opened it now. There is like 2 layers of tape on it, so it had almost been opened before. Hopefully it's not been disturbed, or you know, it's maybe just have checked it or whatever. So hopefully it's not like a broken customer return or something. That would be irritating. But let's see what we get. So we get the remote control. I'm actually quite excited to have a remote control because my current receiver didn't come with one because I bought it used. So I've had to use a dodgy universal remote which just didn't have half the buttons, so comes to the official Denon remote. You also get a pair of AAA batteries for that. Not very exciting. So now let's see the more interesting stuff. So you get the Odyssey microphone. This is a calibration microphone, so the idea is you place this in the middle of the room and it will the machine will then play audio to it and it will work out the best way to calibrate the system, which is really handy. My current receiver doesn't do that, so you have to manually put in all the distances from the speakers, which it then forgets when you switch it off, so this will definitely help a fair bit. So that's the special microphone it comes with, which is actually tripod mountable, which is quite cool. So yeah, that's what you get there. And that just plugs into the front of the receiver. So shift that out of the way. You get an instruction manual, which I should probably read, but nah. You get a bag of bits. So let's see what these are. So you get a couple of radio antennas. So you get the AM loop antenna, as well as an FM antenna. You then also get a couple of sheets of paper. So you get a bunch of stickers to stick on your wires. That's quite nice. So you can actually sort of colour code everything. Get a couple of sheets of that. No, you get just one sheet. Some big safety instructions thing about, you know, not sticking your eye in the AV receiver or something stupid. Does anyone ever read those? Now, this looks interesting. It's like a sort of pile of cardboard all labelled. So this, so that is like a do-it-yourself tripod to put the microphone on. So you effectively like build up like a little, almost like a rocket ship, and you put the microphone on top. I'll just use the proper tripod, so I've got it out right now. But yeah, you've got the little tripod you can make. And now we'll look at the receiver itself. So let's try and get this out of the box and see how we get on. It weighs an absolute ton, and doing this on camera is not easy because of the angle I'm at. However, I'll try. May as well at least get it on camera when I inevitably drop it. There we go. So that's the receiver out there. Just quickly remove the rest of the polystyrene from it. Oh, okay. And finally in the box, you also get an IEC cable, which interestingly is a European one in an adapter, which I've seen before. Sony used to do this quite a lot, but they used to do it on cables that were permanently attached to the appliance. I don't know why you would do it for an IEC lead. Although interestingly, yeah, it's a 2-pin IEC lead. So that confuses me though, because obviously the device doesn't need to be earthed, that's fine. But why not just bundle a 3-pin IEC lead? You know, does it really cost that much less to make these like non-earthed ones? Huh. Anyway, that's interesting. But that's actually a good thing as well, having this, that this receiver has a detachable mains lead. My current one doesn't, it's permanently wired in. And it's a complete pain, because if I ever want to like get the machine out to work on it, you've got to like untie all the cables to get the mains lead untied, whereas this one you can just unplug it from the back. So yeah, I really like devices that have detachable mains leads. So now for the exciting bit, let's unwrap the receiver. So it's just wrapped in this sort of foam stuff. We'll see what we get. There we go, that looks pretty nice. So I'll get it out and we'll sort of go in closer and look at all the features, but yeah, it looks like quite a nice device. It's all sort of nice sort of black finish on it. Definitely looks very smart. The only problem with this is it's really tall. I knew it before buying it, I saw it in the shop, but it's quite a bit taller than my old AV receiver, so I will need to rearrange the rack to actually fit this in. They do seem to have there just seems to be a trend now to make them absolutely massive. And I know Marantz had one that was actually quite nice. It was quite a really thin thing, however, just most of them just seem to be this standard size. So I will need to rearrange the rack to fit it, but it's fine. It definitely looks like a very nice bit of kit. So for our first step, let's take a look at the front of the machine. So it looks very nice. It's quite glossy and reflective. You can almost see the camera in it. But you've got two knobs over here. So this is source selection, and this is for the master volume. There's then various other things. You've got the power switch down here. There's a few buttons along here. So this is for tuner presets because it's got built-in radio. You've got some quick selects for different inputs here. A status button, dimmer. Don't know what these do. Imagine dimmer probably dims the screen. We'll take a look at those later. Then these buttons here are for zone 2. So this has quite a cool function. So it's a 7.1 receiver. However, if you're just using it as a 5.1 receiver, you've still got those two extra channels in the amplifier not being used. So what the zone 2 feature lets you do is select the second input to output over those two leftover channels. So the idea is you could have speakers in a separate room connected back to this receiver, and while you're watching TV from the HDMI input, you could use one of the other inputs and play it through to the other room using that amplifier. I don't think I'll be using that, but it's a nice feature to have if you sort of need it. So that's the button there to switch that on and off, and to select the source that plays through it. Finally, you've got the headphone connection down here, the HDMI input, a USB port, which I think you can play media off of and things like that, and then the connection for that setup microphone. So now here's the back of the machine. So we'll take a look at it and see what connections it has. So right at the top you have two antennas, which are sort of locked into little bits that can pop up. Of course, it's a 2017 device, it has Wi-Fi. I probably won't be using the Wi-Fi because it's being installed in a server rack, which is effectively a big metal Faraday cage. It's also being installed right next to a network switch, so I'll just use standard Ethernet connection instead. That's if I even need the network functionality. I'll have a wee play with it, so I will connect it up. Next over here you have a couple of assignable optical inputs, so you can feed two optical connections from older devices in. I'm actually not going to use these, and it's quite nice. I can get rid of these because I'm currently using an optical connection to connect a PC up. I can now no longer need that. So now here we have all the HDMI inputs. There's a whole 7 of them in total on the back, as well as that one on the front. So you've basically got as much HDMI as you're going to need. And there's those two outputs I talked about. So you've got the two different HDMI outputs you can use. And they're all 4K and Hdcp 2.2 compatible, so that's really nice. The leftmost HDMI output is labelled ARC. This is the audio return channel, which allows audio from a device such as a TV to be fed back down the HDMI cable to the receiver. You've also got a host of sort of legacy analog inputs, so you've got a couple of composite here, as well as a composite output. Then there's all the component as well as a component output. This model doesn't support the analog to digital conversion, so you can't plug analog devices in here and have it output over HDMI. There's a higher end model that does, so if you do have a lot of analog devices you're going to use, you may want to look into that because it can then scale it appropriately to HDMI. This one doesn't do that, you have to connect the analog outputs up to your monitor, and then it'll switch them, but it won't actually convert that to HDMI. Here you've then got a bunch of analog audio connections, so you can feed analog audio connections in, as well as that zone 2 connection for the separate zone that I mentioned previously. It's also got 2 subwoofer outputs. I looked it up, there was some stuff online about how using 2 subwoofers is good, so you've got 2 connections there if you need it. That's why it's called a 7.2 receiver rather than a 7.1 receiver. Of course, I'm just going to use one. Next down here, you've got the AM loop antenna and FM antenna connections, and they came in the box, so that's nice. And finally, you've got all the different connections for your speakers, which are proper sort of screw terminals. They're not those basic ones like this that you sort of squeeze in and put the wire in. A lot of the cheaper receivers had those. These have the proper screw terminals, which also have the little plugs in the end that you can pull out and put banana plugs in if you want as well. So it's got all that. And then finally, you've got a standard 2-pin AC input. One really weird thing I've noticed is this connector on the back here, which is like a sort of the connector you put like a flat flex cable in inside a device, but they've almost exposed it through the back panel. There's no sign what it would be, it's just got a little dot above it. So I'm guessing this must be some sort of programming or debug header that's used in the factory, and they've sort of used that connector either to make it cheap or probably just to make it really hard to probe. Like, you know, it's not like they've put like an RS-232 or a, you know, any sort of connection you can easily plug into, because that'd be a bit of a nightmare to make a cable up for. So it'd be interesting to see what that actually does. Like, is that some sort of serial protocol or is it JTAG? You know, what is that? Okay, so now let's turn it on and see what happens. Obviously there's nothing connected at all, but we'll just check it fires up before I try and wire it in. So plug it in and see if it turns on automatically. I'm using the supplied weird 2-pin cable because I may as well, because it won't work for basically anything else apart from this, so may as well use it. But nope, nothing yet, so let's turn it on at the front. Those lights definitely dipped when that came on, because it's plugged into the same extension lead. But yeah, it's on. It's clicking and shouting at me in stereo CBL, yep. Setup use TV. Cool, so I think it's gone in setup mode, so it's telling me, so I would have an HDMI device connected and I could go through the whole setup wizard. But yeah, it seems to work, which is a good sign. So let's switch that off. Very satisfying clicks of relays there. And now we need to work out how I'm going to install this in my rack, because that is not going to be fun. I couldn't help myself, I just had to take the top off it. Obviously I'm not going to go any further than this. I do not want to break it or void any warranties by, you know, ripping boards out, so I removed the top extremely carefully and we'll just take a look very carefully at it. So the design of this is absolutely lovely. There's just so much going on. It's just such a nice sort of, it just looks so nice. I don't know, I just really like it. So up here you can see the main board with all the HDMI inputs. Over here you can see all these Panasonic chips, which are MN864788, which seems to be some sort of HDMI 2.0 interface chip. So each of those seems to handle like 3 HDMI connections, it seems. So then there's a couple of those. What you've then got down here is this analog devices chip. This is an ADV8003. This looks like an HDMI encoder, so this is actually handling those 2 HDMI outputs, because this chip can actually support 2 HDMI interfaces on it. Over here, there's a Cirrus Logic chip. It's a CS49844A. This is a DTS and Dolby Digital decoder. And then the final chip I've sort of been able to really identify on here is this Altera Max CPLD. So that's quite interesting. They're obviously using that for some sort of signal processing, and they've got a CPLD there either because it was cheaper than using an ASIC, which seems a bit weird, or potentially so they can update it in the future with firmware updates. There's then this sort of raised board here that I really want to take apart, but I'm not going to because that would be a really bad idea. But it's sort of raised up and it goes off the Wi-Fi antennas. But this looks way more than just a Wi-Fi chipset. There's so much more on here. Like, that looks like the Wi-Fi component, but then this looks like there's way more. So I'm wondering if this is like the main processor of this device is under here. This is like the main computer that drives it all. So yeah, that's a look at that board. So now let's take a look at what I'm dealing with here for installing it in the rack. So my current receiver is located here, and then there's a home theatre PC, a server, a router, network switch, and then this rack shelf, which has both my OpenReach modem and my old HDMI matrix switch. And then there's a big PDU down the bottom. Now, first of all, the new receiver is significantly bigger than the old one, so I definitely can't just swap it out. But the other problem is cooling. I don't really like how this receiver is located here with this shelf above it, because obviously this blocks a lot of the heat radiating out the top. This receiver isn't too bad because it has an active cooling fan in it, however the new one doesn't, so I won't really be able to have it here at all. So I think what I'm going to do is remove this shelf completely because I don't really need it, because I'm getting rid of the matrix switch. So all that really leaves is the modem, which I can just shove somewhere at random. I'll then move the network switch and router down to down here somewhere, and then I can mount the AV receiver so it's the top thing in the rack. So all the heat can be radiated right out the top of the rack where there's an active fan sucking air out. So yeah, I'm going to have to do a lot of rearranging here, so that's going to be a lot of fun. So I'll come back once I've actually sort of rearranged stuff ready for the receiver to go in, because filming that would just make it like 10 times harder, and trying to do that under these hot lights that I'm trying to film with would just make it impossible. So time to unwire all this and I'll come back when it's done. Okay, so just a quick update on this. I've now rearranged the rack to how it's going to be so we can now put the receiver in. So I basically took loads of stuff out, moved it all around. So the switch and router are now down at the bottom here. The server will go in below. The HDPC is now here, and that now leaves a big sort of empty space on the top shelf for the AV receiver, which will sit nicely in there. The rack also has a fan in the top that's been there forever, and it just exhausts air out the top. That'll be right above the receiver, so that'll help keep it cool. And for the modem, I've just shoved it down the side here. It works for now. I'll maybe stick it somewhere later. That's allowed me to remove an entire 2U rack shelf, which gives plenty of space to fit the receiver. So now to get the receiver in and wire it all up. Okay, so the cabling job from hell is now done. It's a complete mess, but it'll work. I can always tidy it up later. But all the speakers are connected, along with both the projector and TV for HDMI outputs, and then the PC is connected in over an HDMI cable. And then there's just a pair of RCA jacks just going to 3.5mm cable, just in case I ever need that. And then the orange RCA jack goes up to the subwoofer. So yeah, it's all in place. Next thing to do is try and get the back put back on the rack, get it back into the corner, and then go through the setup process. So it's now time for the moment of truth where we switch it on for the first time and go through the setup. So I've just plugged it into the TV because the projector's hard to film, and we'll see what happens. So I'm going to turn it on and we'll see if it actually works. Yep, TV's getting a feed now. Let's wait for it to start. Oh. So we're now in the setup wizard. So that's a good sign. So now we'll run through this and see how we get on. Okay, so we pick the language. Proper configuration, da da da. Next. Okay, so it's now asking me, tell me about all the stuff that's in the box. Done that. Oh, click. Placing and connecting your speaker as well. I've done that already, so... Oh no, I should have pressed skip. Well, I'm stuck now. This is quite cool. So if you didn't know what you were doing at all, this would actually tell you how to wire the speakers up. Of course, I've already done that, so I really should press the skip option. Yes. Next. Yeah. I should have skipped the setup thing. So yep, that's correct. So next, wait for the connected. So this might do a, yep, it's going to do a test tone. So let's see if it works. Subwoofer's switched on. Yeah, it should be. No, that's concerning. Okay, so I can't hear sound at the speaker, so I'm going to have to go and check the connections and everything. Oh well, back in a bit. And we're back. That was weird. I didn't even touch any wiring. I literally just pressed volume up and volume down on the remote, and that kicked it into life. So, yeah, I can hear sound now. That's right. Yep. I think that's going. Yep, that's going to the right place. Yep. Cool, so all the speakers are now actually working. So it's now asking me to do the Odyssey Multi-EQ XT to the microphone thing. I want to know how they come up with these names, like Odyssey Multi-EQ XT. How many people did it take to come up with that? But anyway, so we can now do this. So hit next, and I need to put it on a tripod, that's fine. Plug it into the front of the machine, and we'll work through this. Okay, so the microphone is now here on this projector stand, and I've hooked up to the receiver. The cable it comes with is absolutely massive, so you don't need to worry about the cable and the microphone being too short. So we'll do a quick calibration and see what happens. Now, I will have to redo this after I finish filming, because in order to film I rearranged the room. So there's currently a couch sitting in front of the centre speaker and big lights everywhere, so it'll completely calibrate it wrong, but once I've put the room back to normal, I'll actually recalibrate it before I do like a listening test. So let's just press next and see what happens. Oh god, I've got to move the microphone around, really? Okay, so I need to place the microphone in 8 different positions. That's going to be fun. It's very thorough, that's for sure. So anyway, I'll just do one just so you can see what happens, and then I'll, stop, because I'm not going to film 8 different attempts. So let's begin test. Okay, so that was pretty interesting. It just made that really weird noise on all the speakers, and then it is now asking me to do it again, so that's pretty cool. So obviously I'm not going to film the rest of this because it's just doing the same thing over and over again, and I'm going to throw these results away anyway. But yeah, that was pretty nice. So what I'll do now is I'll tidy everything up, get it all ready, set it all up, and then we'll get it all going and actually see it running. Okay, so the receiver is now hooked up and I've finished the calibration. It didn't take too long, because it turns out that even though it says 8 zones that you need to put the microphone in, you actually need to do it in 3, and then for other ones just for additional listening positions, so you can just continue past that. So yeah, it's now ready to go. So it's now the next day. I've calibrated it and I listened to it last night, and after a bit of faffing about to get the Windows PC to actually output the correct surround sound signals, it works really well. I'm really impressed with this thing. So obviously it's really hard to convey sort of what it sounds like and how the surround sound works over a stereo YouTube video, but I'll just sort of turn it on, show you it running, and go through a couple of quick demos. But I can't really do a huge amount, obviously, just because it's not a surround sound video and it's compressed and all that stuff. But yeah, we'll take a look at it and see how it all works. So I now have it hooked up to the TV and it's running. I normally use a projector for all this, but I'm not going to try and film that because it's a DLP projector, so it'll just go into crazy flashing colours on camera. So we'll just have to make do with the TV. But yeah, so it's running now, but there's no input, so it just displays this Denon screen. So it's quite nice. It doesn't just go to a horrible blue screen or something when there's no video. It gives you quite a subtle black screen. But from here you can access all the menus, so we can open up the main setup menu, which has a good number of options. You can adjust all the volume levels, you can do all the calibration. You can go with the Odyssey stuff. This is the stuff that's done through auto calibration is in this menu. You can also adjust all the video, so you can change HDMI settings, change resolutions, all that sort of stuff. Inputs lets you assign different inputs, so you can say your Blu-ray player's on a different input from the one that's the standard one. You can change it all, so you get this sort of matrix, so you can actually specify what inputs are connected to what things and what analog inputs go into what video feeds and all that stuff. So that's quite handy. You can rename sources if you want, it obviously doesn't change any buttons because they're just on the remote, but it will change what it displays on the screen. So that's a handy thing if you wanted to play with that. I might actually try renaming media player to PC. You can hide sources that aren't connected, you can change levels of each thing. It's pretty nice. Now the speaker configuration is quite important. So this is the Odyssey setup, which is the automatic thing using the microphone, which I did. However, it didn't detect my crossover frequencies properly for all my speakers. The speakers I use have a crossover frequency of 100 Hz for the subwoofer, whereas this set it to about 140. So when I set it all up, I found the subwoofer sounded really loud compared to what I used to have, and that wasn't really great. But you can go into these settings here, and you can adjust the crossover levels and set them to the appropriate ones for your speakers. So even though the setup didn't quite work there, it actually ended up absolutely fine. Then yeah, there's loads more options. There's network settings, so you can go in network information, you can see it's on the Ethernet network. That was all automatic. I also performed a software update on it, which it did all completely automatically. It just popped up saying there's an update available, press yes, downloads the update, and it switches itself off and just sits for a while doing the update, but also gives you progress on the screen on the front, which was nice, so you did see it was still updating. This is all the HEOS account system, so this is for some sort of online feature it has. I'm not using any of that, but it does have it if you want. So now let's take a look at what other things it has. So we'll take a look at the HDMI in a second, but what it's also got is quite good multimedia, sort of built in. So you can open up internet radio using the button on the remote, and it pulls up this. And this gives you tune-in internet radio directly on the receiver, in theory. There we go, so press play. And now it's gone to Bluetooth. Yeah, so this is something I found. I was using Bluetooth audio before. It seemed to have a really dodgy distinction between things like internet radio and Bluetooth. Pressing either button on the remote, so it takes you into the exact same thing, and you've got to sort of stab random buttons until it eventually does what you want. But there, we can go into here, we can go into local radio, and you can pick countries. It's a standard tune-in system. It's the same thing you get on like Logitech Squeezebox players and things like that. You pick your location on the list, and then from here you can pick different radio stations, and then probably end up getting some sort of, okay, I'm going to put on Radio 4 so I don't get a copyright strike. It's not my choice of station.
Over the legal limit for alcohol.
But there you go. So it's got a built-in tune-in radio, which is quite nice to have.
Seriously injured in the crash near Newport Pagnell in Buckinghamshire.
So that's pretty nice to have. You've also got Bluetooth, which is pretty good. So you can just connect a phone to it over Bluetooth and make that, and it'll play. I found that to be a little bit intermittent. I occasionally had it cutting out and it would sort of stutter and then come back and start playing again. I'm guessing that's possibly because the machine's inside a metal cabinet, and that blocks the signal a bit. Because moving the phone much closer helped. I had it a few meters away and it occasionally broke up. So that's worth bearing in mind, but it's not a big deal. But yeah, it's got a lot of built-in internet connected functionality that's quite handy to have. So what we'll now do is take a look at feeding a PC into it and getting actual proper surround sound out of it. So what we'll do is we'll switch to the media player input again, which is what I've got the PC plugged into. And it just comes up with this black screen. I can now go in and I can turn the PC on. And we can now see the PC start up. So the Denon screen's gone away, and that's the PC now booting. And once it starts up, I'll come back. Okay, so the machine is now booted and we're into Windows. Now what I really like about this, that I don't know if it's standard for AV receivers, because I've never really used one with HDMI before, but it has a proper on-screen display over the HDMI output. So I'm adjusting the volume here on the receiver's remote, but it still pulls up the menu. It also lets you open all the system menus and just use them while having your HDMI signal in the background, which is really nice to have. So if I'm adjusting the volume, I don't constantly have to look down at the receiver to work out what I'm setting it to. Another thing I found that's quite fun is when you hold the button on, so when you adjust the volume, it goes down sort of 0.5 steps, which is good. But then if you hold it down, it rapidly drops off, like it really accelerates quickly down, which is quite handy. It's a minor thing, but it's quite good for the, if you're watching TV late at night and suddenly it turns on really loud, you can quickly hold it and turn it down really quickly, which is a really minor thing, but it's just something I noticed that was quite cool. So what we'll now do is take a look at how I had to faff about to get the actual surround sound to work. So when I first got it set up, I panicked because I couldn't get surround sound out of it, and I thought I was doing something majorly wrong, and I thought it wasn't compatible with what I was doing, and it was a bit concerning. Because the first thing I did was download one of these Dolby Atmos demo files, it's just a video that does surround. But I found that despite this being a 5.1 channel file, whenever I'm playing it, all I was getting was stereo. The receiver would just constantly come in stereo mode. As you can see there, under sound it just says stereo. And I had no idea why it was doing this. Why would it be stuck in stereo mode? So it turns out it's a twofold issue. First of all, you need to make sure the receiver is set to the auto detection of audio signals. So to do that, on the remote, there's this pure button in the bottom right hand corner. You need to press that until it goes on to auto. And once it's set to auto, which comes up on the screen on the front of the receiver and on the TV there, that's now set to automatically detect what audio signal to use. Now it's there, we can then tell Windows to output 5.1. So to do that, I had to go into the Windows sound settings, pick the HDMI output and go to configure. I can then pick 5.1 surround here, and now when I press test, it now works correctly. And that subwoofer is way louder than I expected it to be. So we can now go next, and we can continue through, and now the machine's set up for 5.1 output. So what we'll now do is I'll set the microphone up so it's going to be recording 360, and I'll run that demo. It's obviously not going to be surround for you, but we'll just see what it sounds like, just to get a rough idea, I suppose. Just for fun, it's not really going to come across on YouTube. Okay, so now let's get this demo going. So there you have it. That was a demo of it doing surround sound. And it obviously probably didn't come across on camera at all. It just, stereo, it's just not going to work. However, it sounded ridiculous in real life. That was louder than I've ever had it, and I could actually hear my rack shaking. I think I had it a little bit too loud there, but yeah, it sounds really good. So yeah, I am really impressed with the sound quality from this thing. It's just, yeah, it's really good. Another feature that I quite like is the display on the front of the device, because it shows everything you're doing on screen on that display, which isn't a huge deal if you're configuring menus while using an HDMI signal, because you'll see it on your TV itself. But say for example I want to use the internet radio, I can press the button on the remote and the screen will clearly say what it's doing. So I can go into here, it'll start playing the radio, and it'll tell us on the front of the device what it's doing. I can then press the back button, for example, and I can sort of navigate the menus fairly easily, so I don't need to have an HDMI device connected to operate things such as the internet radio, which is quite a nice little feature. This also applies for any sort of setup menu, so if I go into the main settings menu, I can actually browse through this and not necessarily worry too much. It will actually list everything I need on the front of the device, which is handy. So yeah, that is quite a nice feature as well. So there you have it. That was a demo of my new AV receiver, which is a Denon AVR-X2400H. Obviously there's way more features than I've been able to show here. It can connect to music servers, you can do loads of sort of Spotify Connect, things like that I've not yet tried. However, just for playing audio from a PC over HDMI, as well as things like the Bluetooth audio, it works really well. And I can't really fault it too much. The only issues I've really had is that it locked up once on me when playing from Bluetooth. The audio continued to play, but it wouldn't respond to any controls, and I had to restart it by holding down the power button. But it's only done that once, so I don't know if that's really a major issue, or if it's just I maybe pressed the wrong button. For all I know, I put it into a lock mode or something. And beyond that, there's nothing really wrong with it. The front panel does pick up fingerprints, so bear that in mind, but yeah, apart from that, I'm really impressed with it. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and stand by potentially for more videos of this where I actually discover new features it has. So yeah, thank you very much for watching.